To record this, right? Because a few people ask and you shall
receive. There you go. Well, to all of you who are in class with me today and all of you who will be watching this, hopefully before Pesach, because it might help you with navigate the Seder. I want to wish everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a Chag of Sameach to everyone who is new to the shopping situation in for Pesach in Israel. It's an experience unlike anything else, and it gives you a lot of respect for Manischewitz and Streitz back in the United States, who made it very easy for us. However, no one said it would be easy. So your first Pesach is going to be a doozy. Enjoy it. Don't worry if you ate a little bit of kitniot. It won't change your God's opinion of you, believe me. And you will still be blessed. And everyone should just enjoy their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. That's the purpose of this Chag. So let's get started. Okay. Sometimes we approach Jewish rituals and texts like we've gone through it so many times. It's just the way it is. We can't imagine it any differently or any other way. Yet year after year, we experience the Seder. We read the same words. It just is this way. But do we ever really think about the words? If we actually thought about what we say in the text, the traditional text of the Haggadah, we would might have a few questions on Seder night, and we might find it astounding. On Seder night, we fulfill the central command to retell the story of the Exodus to our children on the anniversary of the Exodus from Egypt. The book of Exodus spends chapters telling us the story in detail of how we left Mitzrayim. Wouldn't it make sense to read the actual text of Exodus given in the Torah and to read how the Jews triumphantly left Egypt? If the story we tell our family at Seder night doesn't come from the book of Exodus, well, where does it come from? Well, I'm going to tell you that it comes from something that happens 40 years later, when Moshe Rabbeinu imagines a future that's more removed from the story of the Exodus, that will take place years later in Eretz Yisrael, and when the Jews are finally settled in the land of Israel. Sefer Devarim in chapter 26, let's share, and I'm going to share this, I'm going to try and share this with you. Okay. Can you see that? And can everyone see that on the screen? Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay. In chapter 26, Parsha Kitavo, Can I have a reader? Becky, can you see this?
Sure. Sure.
Go ahead.
And it will be when you come into the land which the Lord your God gives you for an inheritance, and you possess it and settle in it, that you shall take of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you will bring from your land, which the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall put them into a basket and go to a place which the Lord your God will choose to have his name dwell there. And you shall come to the Cohen who will be serving in those days and say to him, I declare this day to the Lord your God that I have come to the land which the Lord swore our forefathers to give us. And the Cohen will take the basket from your hand, laying it before the altar of the Lord your God. And you shall call out and say before the Lord your God, an Aramean sought to destroy my forefather, and he went down to Egypt and sojourned there with a small number of people. And there he became great, mighty, and a numerous nation. And the Egyptians treated us cruelly and afflicted us, and they imposed hard labor upon us. So we cried out to the Lord, God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out from Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, with a great awe and with signs of wonders.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Does that sound familiar to
Yes.
anybody? Okay, very good. So instead of reading from the book of Exodus, what happened to our people and our forefathers as they came out of Mitzrayim, we are reading from Devarim, Parshat Kitavo, where this farmer is telling the Kohen a story. He declares before the Kohen, he declared before the Kohen, before you, God, that I have come to the land that you, God, have sworn to my forefathers. And then it goes on to tell the story. Arami Oved Avi, the farmer says, my father was a wandering Aramean. That should sound very familiar to all of us who read the Haggadah year after year. It seems, according to the Sforno, a commentator, that the farmer is referring to Jacob, Yaakov in Lavan's house. And when he left Lavan's house and went back to the land of Canaan, but he, Jacob, didn't stay in Canaan. He went down to Mitzrayim, and there he dwelt, few in number, and his family grew larger and then became great in number. But the Egyptians were evil to us, says the text in the Torah. They oppressed us. They put upon us hard labor. We cried out to God, and God saved and delivered us from Egypt with an outstretched arm, with signs and wonders, and brought us to the place, to the land of Israel, to the land flowing with milk and honey. This is really the text that we use as the core of the Haggadah. Everything else that we say in Magid, telling the story, is the section in which we actually retell the Exodus. The rest of it is all midrashic. It expands on what we just said, and these verses, what do they actually tell us in the text? Why do we use the farmer's declaration in the land of Israel instead of the Torah's own account of how we actually left Mitzrayim. Perhaps the Torah is telling us that we are supposed to adopt the farmer's perspective. We're not just supposed to retell history, the actual verses of the Torah. We're supposed to retell the story in a way that gives meaning to what happened, the same kind of meaning that the farmer gives it, his history, our history. What is the farmer actually doing? Well, the farmer is giving thanks to God. The farmer is testifying that God fulfilled a long deferred promise, a promise he made to our ancestors that he would give the land of Canaan to them. It took many centuries for that promise to be fulfilled. But when the farmer stands there at the Beit HaMikdash with the Kohen, with his fruits, his first fruits, he is living proof that the promise has been fulfilled. The farmer is acknowledging the truth. He is relating to God as the promise keeper. We say the words of the farmer, which is in Magid, and then overcome with gratitude and praise, we move on to, we transition into Hallel. And these are verses of thanksgiving. If you look in the Haggadah, there is another promise other than the one that God says to the children in Egypt. It says, God made a promise to our forefathers. Blessed is he who keeps his promise to Israel. What promise are we referring to here? We are referring to the promise of the Brit Bein Habitarim. Let's see. We're going to look at the text. Can you see the text? In Bereshit, chapter 15, Ellen, can you read for us, please?
Sure. And he said to Avram, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. And also the nation that they will serve, I will judge, and afterwards they will go forth with great possessions.
Okay, thank you. Okay. In this verse, in Bereshit, that we just read, the covenant that God made to Abraham when God revealed to Abraham that his children would go into slavery hundreds of years before it would really occur. God tells Abraham, your children will be strangers in a land not their own, and the inhabitants of the land will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. And after that, I, God, will judge that nation, and afterward you will go out with great wealth. Well, what a puzzling set of verses. Is Abraham supposed to say, thank you for hearing all of that? Abraham, your children are going to be slaves for 400 years. Don't worry, says God, they'll come out of it all right with lots of wealth. This is such a dark promise. This is so interesting that God would reveal this to Abraham, and yet the Haggadah says we are supposed to thank God for the fact that he made good on the promise to take us out of Egypt. If I were Abraham, I think I would say, you know what, God, I tell you what, you keep the slavery, keep the wealth, let us just be. I don't want my children to go into slavery. Well, but did God would have listened to some kind of dialogue like that? I'm not so sure, because if we really want to come to grips with the question of why we thank God for having taken us out of Egypt, it seems to me we really need to look at the strange prophecy that God reveals to Abraham. Abraham's prophecy could have actually been fulfilled in another surprising way, other than Bnei Yisrael going down to Egypt. And in order to understand those ways, we need to go back to some of the early stories in Bereshit. In Bereshit, in the Torah records our forefather Yaakov, who spent 20 long years laboring faithfully in the service of his father-in-law Lavan. Then one day, seemingly out of the blue, Yaakov decides it's time to go back home to the land of Canaan. And the verse in Bereshit, it's interesting. We're going to read that. Let's see. I'm going to share this. The verses in Bereshit. Janice, would you mind reading this for us? The Bereshit chapter 30.
It came to pass when Rachel had borne Yosef, that Yaakov said to Lavan, "Send me away, and I will go to my place and to my land. Give me my wives and my children for whom I worked for you, and I will go. For you know my work, which I have worked for you."
Okay. So it seems, if we really want to understand the text of the Haggadah, this is where we have to start, by understanding that we could have maybe understood the slavery issue in a totally different way. Yaakov has just told Lavan he wants to go home. And it happened when Rachel gave birth to Yosef, that Yaakov said to Lavan, "Let me go, and I'll go back to my place, to my land." Something strange is going on here. The text seems to suggest that there was something about the birth of Yosef that propelled Yaakov to want to leave from Lavan's home. When Rachel gives birth to Yosef, then Yaakov said to Lavan, "Let me go." What was it about the birth of Yosef that convinced Yaakov it was time to go? Well, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik Zetzal suggested a fascinating theory. All the forefathers knew about God's prophecy to Abraham, but no one knew exactly when or where it would happen. It was a very obscure promise, and for all that ambiguity, Rav Soloveitchik theorizes perhaps Yaakov saw an interpretation that rang true for him. Now let's take a look at why he might think that. The prophecy says, your children will be strangers in a land not their own. Yaakov, having run away from his brother Esav, no longer is in his land, but he is in Haran, in Lavan's land, in his household. Perhaps he looked at himself and said, maybe that prophecy is about me. I'm a stranger in the land, not my own. And then the prophecy continues, Abraham's children would be enslaved. Yaakov looks at himself and says, I've been working for Lavan for over 20 plus years. That could be considered as slavery, and the work has never ceased. The prophecy continues. Abraham's children won't just be enslaved, they will be oppressed. They will be victims of injustice. Yaakov says to himself, I've been the victim of injustice at the hand of my treacherous father-in-law Lavan. Wasn't I tricked with my wives? Aren't I tricked into working? And then the prophecy said it would happen for 400 years. Again, Yaakov says, maybe that's just to mean a lot of time. Maybe it's not really for 400 years, but I've been in Lavan's service for over 21 years. So for him, he thought all the criteria fit. Maybe God continues in the promise saying that I am going to exact judgment against the oppressor, and such that afterwards the children of Abraham will leave with great wealth. What does Yaakov now say to himself? He wants to leave. And how does he want to leave? Well, he does something very interesting. He has this trick by which the sheep are going to give birth to speckled and spotted sheep. And then he's going to leave with all these sheep. And in fact, God helps him. Miraculously, there is all these speckled and spotted sheep, and it really looks as if God has intervened and vindicated Yaakov, making sure that he leaves the house of the oppressor with great wealth. It seems like the prophecy was coming true. And finally, Rav Soloveitchik says, the fourth generation will return to the land of Israel. Well, Abraham, that's the first generation. Yitzhak, that's the second generation. Yaakov, that's the third generation. And now Yaakov says, I have a son, Yosef, fourth generation. He says, I was tricked into marrying Leah. Yes, I have children with my wife, Leah, but Rachel is my real basher, my real wife. And the first child is the fourth generation realized in this little baby Yosef. And it happened when Rachel gave birth to Yosef that Jacob said, let me go and let me return to my land. It almost evokes the words later spoken by Moshe when he says, let my people go. Yaakov thought he was the fulfillment of the promise and the prophecy? Well, let's look at how Yaakov leaves Lavan's house. In Bereshit chapter 31, on the third day, it was told to Lavan that Yaakov had run away. Where else in the Torah do you ever hear these words? That exact formula is in Exodus chapter 14, verse 5. It appears only one other time in the entire Torah. You might have guessed it is when it was told to the king of Egypt that the Israelites had fled from Egypt, and the actual exodus from Egypt began. But it's really just a question from the language used in the Torah describing Yaakov leaving Lavan's house. When, by the way, was it told to Lavan that Yaakov had fled? It was on the third day. And in the text, in the text, when you think about the third day in the context of Egypt, we remember how Moshe had gone to Paro, and what did he say? Let my people go out into the desert and they will pray to their God for 3 days and they will return. Remember that? Lavan took all of his brothers with him and he chases after Yaakov. When Paro chased after the Jews, Paro took his people with him. The next verb that we hear is that Lavan not only takes his people and chases after Yaakov, but later on, he actually catches up with Yaakov. This is the same thing that happens in the story of the Exodus. Paro chases after the Jews, and Paro and his army catches up with the Jews. All of these verbs, it was reported, it was told to someone, and he took, meaning the people took something with them, and he chased and he caught up. Every one of these verbs in this order are the same order in both the Yaakov Lavan story and the Egypt Paro's Exodus story. So I ask you, was Yaakov really wrong when he thought that he was the fulfillment of the enslaved children of Israel? It happens here. Yaakov leaves after the start of working for 20 at the beginning of the 21st year. The Jews left Mitzrayim at the end, not 400 years, but 210 years. It's the same number multiplied by 10. It's as if what happened to Yaakov was just a microcosm of ultimately what would happen to the Jews in Mitzrayim. Yaakov could have been the fulfillment of God's prophecy. Why wasn't he? Why wasn't he the one? It's a very interesting question. The sages say because of the sale of Yosef. caught up with him, took him by surprise. Now listen carefully. The sages are saying Yaakov could have been the fulfillment of the prophecy of slavery that was told to Abraham, except for one little problem: the sale of Yosef. That starts the cycle all over again. What happened in the sale of Yosef? Think about it. Think about what went on in the story. The way Yaakov left Lavan's house was just like the way the Jews left Mitzrayim. What about getting there? How did we get to Lavan's house? How did we get to Mitzrayim? Could those events be parallel to each other? The Jews got down to Egypt because Yosef's brothers sold him to merchants going to Egypt, and slowly the family migrates down to Egypt after him, and soon they were slaves in a land that was not their own. When the brothers sold Yosef into slavery, what did they do? They looked at Yosef. Jacob was treating him like his Bechor, his firstborn. But there were other sons, there were other children, before Yosef, who didn't take kindly that Yosef was being treated like the favorite, like the firstborn. So what did they do? They took a goat, they slaughtered it, they take its blood, and they take Yosef's coat, and what do? They dip the coat in the blood of the goat, and they brought the coat to their father. And they decreed this, and they deceived their father about the child the father thought was his firstborn. What does that remind you of a generation earlier? It reminds you of how Yaakov gets down to Lavan's house, because there was another time when a child thought he was the Bechor, but his father thought that someone else was the firstborn. It's the time when Yaakov, remember the story of Yaakov, took upon himself to deceive his father. Yaakov brought the meat of a goat to his father. He dresses up in the coat of his brother Esav, and he says to his father, I am your Bechor, give me a bracha. I am your firstborn, give me a blessing. That's what the children of Yaakov did. What Yaakov had done to his own father Yitzhak and his brother Esav. Do you see the same parallels? Do you see what's going on here? Deception number one brought Yaakov down into Lavan's house, into a mini slavery. And in deception number two, the sons of Yaakov go down to Mitzrayim, to Paro's household, because they had sold their brother into slavery and had deceived their father. Yaakov's children did what he had done to his own father. And here we have the true reason for the slavery in Egypt. Brother selling brother, brother deceiving fathers, lies, hatred, sons treating fathers deceptively, sons falsely giving information to their fathers, all because they wanted to be number one. And then the slavery starts all over again. Children had once more deceived their father about the Behor, and this time fate would decree that it wouldn't be 21 years of slavery, but it would be 210 years of slavery. 10 years, 21 years for each of the 10 brothers who sold Yosef. It wouldn't just be an individual and his family that was enslaved like Yaakov thought he was. It would be an entire nation. There doesn't seem to be any memory of what it was that took us down to Mitzrayim, of how we got there, except for when the farmer at the Beit HaMikdash declares, "Once my father was a wandering Aramaean." And he recalls the story in its entirety as we have just heard. And so, my friends, how did we get to be slaves in Egypt? We put ourselves there. Yes, when brothers pits himself against brother, when family fights within itself, there are always consequences. Abraham knew his children would be slaves, but he didn't know why. And now you know why Abraham didn't know. So when the farmer in our story, many, many years later, standing at the Beit HaMikdash with the Kohen, tells his story and declares that he is telling the story of his family. He is actually telling the Haggadah story to the Kohen, and that farmer is telling the Kohen that God, in all his magnificent mercy and infinite wisdom, brought the children of Israel out of slavery because he had made a promise to his child, Abraham. God keeps his promise to the Jewish nation, despite the fact that children did not keep their envy, their jealousy, and animosity out of their lives. So when the farmer blesses God with gratitude for his miraculous miraculous event of freedom, he is telling the story like the Maggid story of redemption of the Jewish people. And he is saying Hallel after the Maggid. He is singing songs of praise. He is actually showing gratitude to God, something we should be thanking God all and showing God our gratitude. Hashem always says to us, there are always consequences for bad behavior. We've learned that over and over and over again in this class, how there are consequences for our bad behavior, Bnei Yisrael's bad behavior and bad choices. However, our Father and our King rises above all of the bickering, all the pettiness, and the deception among his children, and he always brings us home. Chag Sameach.
Wow. Wow.
What
Wow.
a
That was
fabulous
beautiful, Rhonda. Thank you
shiur.
so much.
Thank you
If
for a
there-
totally
are there
different
any-
perspective.
Are there any
Beautiful.
questions?
It always bothered me, the deceptions that took place along the way for people that we hold very high in terms of our history and in terms of our continuance of Judaism. It really bothered me, it still bothers me, the deception that took place.
And isn't that true of a lot of people that we hold in high regard to this day? Everybody's human. That's the bottom line.
True.
They are human,
But we hold certain
but-
people to a different regard.
but I wonder, just because we're human, do we have to deceive people? Do we have to
Right.
be jealous? Do we have to want something that we don't have or that we really weren't born into? Do we have to go to such great lengths to be number one when it's fine to be number two, a great number two, or maybe a great number three? Remember there was a car company, Avis, and they said we're number two or something. Or do you remember that in years ago? What is it? What was it?
Try harder.
We try harder. We're number two or something. There's nothing wrong with being number two. There's nothing wrong with any of it. So I'm not so sure. I think that it shows, yes, people are human, but do they always make the right choices in terms of what they do in their lives when it hurts so many people and has tremendous consequences? How many times did we learn about this in Malachim? How many times did we learn that about time after time after time? Hashem says, stay on the right path. There's going to be consequences if you don't. And how many times do we hear, but I will bring you home? And this is, we go into exile, we come back. And now even learning in Nehemiah, we learn there's still problems. Time and time, we have to show God our gratitude all the time because we make bad choices. And that's what gets us into trouble. And that's what causes us to have to clean like slaves before Pesach. So,
Rhonda, I just wanted to mention that Shelley came on the class. She's here now.
Shelley, are you here?
She's muted, but she's there.
Shelley, we want to sing happy birthday to you. We know it's next week. And Maureen, your cousin, has sponsored today's class in your honor. So everybody, let's sing happy birthday to Shelley. You ready?
Hopefully she's
Happy
there.
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Shelley. Happy birthday to you. Yay!
and she disappeared.
What?
We
What?
were saying to her and she disappeared.
No, she's still here. She turned, her camera went on.
Oh. Oh, okay. Oh, there she is.
Our singing's not that bad.
I was worried.